Wyoming Territory, August 1882. The baby did not cry when she dropped from the bedroom window, but Naomi Jensen's heart nearly split in two from the sound of her own boots hitting the dirt outside. She held her breath and clutched the child tighter, her bag clinking with a sound of coins and glass. The night air was dry, sharp with sage and looming rain. Behind her, the house stayed quiet, no lanterns lit, no voices raised. Not yet. She stepped backward into the dark, never turning her back on the two-story boarding house she had fled. She had not meant to steal the baby. But she had not meant to fall in love with her either. Tiny Tessa, barely 6 months old, born to a woman who never once looked her in the eye and a man who shouted more than he spoke. Naomi had seen bruises too fresh, seen the way they left the child on the floor at night to cry. When the woman passed out cold at supper and the man stumbled off toward the saloon, Naomi packed her bag and wrapped the baby in her shawl. She did not think. She just moved. By the time she reached the edge of town, the stars had shifted. Her boots were worn through at the toes, the bag heavy with a jar of milk, 2 apples, and the last of the dry biscuits from her trunk. She had no plan. Just away. Away was enough. The road stretched wide and quiet ahead of her, moon-dusted and empty. She walked until her legs trembled, until the baby whimpered against her chest. The mountains loomed far to the west, but she turned south. There was nothing north but cold and the man who might be waking up angry. Near dawn, the wind picked up and the dust stung her eyes. Naomi stumbled, caught herself, and pressed forward. Tessa stirred with a soft cry. The bottle was nearly empty. She whispered, "Just a little further, baby girl." But she had no idea where further was. She had just crested a rise when her knees buckled. The baby slipped in her arms. Naomi caught her, but the bag slid down the hill, scattering its contents. She dropped beside it, sobbing, cradling Tessa to her chest. "You all right there?" The voice came low and steady from behind her. Naomi jerked around. A man on horseback sat just a few paces off, reins loose in one hand, a rifle resting across his saddle. He looked about 30, maybe older. Dust-colored hair curled at his neck, his face shadowed by the brim of his hat. His shirt was worn thin at the shoulders, but his boots were clean, and his horse looked well fed. "Do not come closer," Naomi said, pulling the child tighter. The man raised his free hand. "Not trying to scare you. Just saw someone fall over on my land. Figured I ought to ask." Naomi's throat burned. We are not stealing." "I did not say you were." He paused. "You look near dead on your feet. And that baby there. She needs rest." Naomi looked down at Tessa. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyelids heavy. The bottle was gone now, lost in the grass. Naomi blinked hard. The man dismounted slowly and came closer, stopping a good distance away. "Name's Quinton Ashby. I got a cabin down the hill. You can rest there. I got bread. Some milk to spare." She wanted to say no. She wanted to keep walking until her legs gave out, and the wind took them both. But Tessa's little lips were dry, and Naomi's arms were shaking. "Please," she whispered. "Please." Quinton nodded once, then crouched to retrieve her bag. He said nothing about the coins or the broken jar. Instead, he looked at the baby and said, "She got a name?"
"Tessa."
"You, Naomi Jensen." He looked at her long, but not in a way that made her skin crawl. Just steady.
"Kind."
Then he held out his hand. She did not take it, but she did follow him. The cabin was small, tucked into a slope of cottonwoods with a creek running behind it. A barn stood nearby, and 2 cows blinked at them as they passed. Naomi walked slower now, her legs stiff, her head pounding. Quinton opened the door and stepped aside. "Go on in." Inside, it smelled like wood smoke and coffee. A cot stood in the corner, a table near the window. It was clean.
Sparse.
Safe. Naomi stepped in and sat on the edge of the cot. The baby whimpered, and she gently rocked her. Quinton set the bag on the table and pulled a loaf of bread from a tin. He sliced off a thick piece and handed it to her. "You can sleep here. I will take the barn. You do not have to, I know." He looked at her. "But I do not leave women and babies out in the dirt." She stared at him, unsure how to respond. She took the bread, tore off a piece, and chewed. Quinton filled a cup with milk and held it out. Naomi drank, then gave the rest to Tessa in small spoonfuls. The baby's eyes fluttered closed, her fist curling against Naomi's chest. "Thank you," she said softly. Quinton nodded. "You can stay as long as you need." Naomi swallowed. "He will come looking. You can rest for now. We will figure the rest later." The kindness in his words nearly undid her. She tucked Tessa beneath the blanket and leaned back against the wall. Her body ached, but her heart ached more. Quinton turned to go. Before he stepped outside, he looked back. "You are safe here, Naomi." She closed her eyes. For the first time in years, she believed it. Tessa slept through the morning, curled beneath a quilt that smelled faintly of smoke and pine. Naomi didn't sleep, not really. She laid still, eyes tracking the shape of light shifting across the cabin wall as the sun climbed. Her body felt hollow, used up, and a dull ache throbbed behind her ribs like a bruise that never healed right. Outside, she heard the soft rhythm of a saw moving through wood, slow and even. She sat up, careful not to jostle the baby, and set her bare feet to the plank floor. It was swept clean but rough with knots. She crossed to the window and looked out. Quinton was in the yard, sleeves rolled to the elbow, steadying a length of timber against a sawhorse. He worked without hurry, his motions sure. Beyond him, a line of shirts hung from a rope between two trees, snapping in the breeze. Someone had washed them recently. The fabric looked sun-bleached and patched. She watched for a moment, then turned away. Her stomach hurt with hunger, but she felt strange asking for more. Instead, she poured a little water from the clay jug and dabbed it over her face and neck with a strip of cloth she found folded beside the basin. The cold steadied her. Tessa stirred then, letting out a thin, rasping cry. Naomi lifted her gently and rocked her close. "Sure, I know," she whispered, brushing her lips to the baby's temple. "We'll figure it out. We will." Footsteps sounded on the porch, followed by a soft knock. "I've got eggs, if you're hungry." She opened the door. Quinton stood there holding a tin plate, steam rising from the food. "I can cook," Naomi said, though her voice came out hoarse. "I know. Figured you ought to eat before you worry about anything else." She hesitated, then took the plate with both hands. "Thank you." He nodded once and stepped back into the yard. She ate slowly, her hands trembling a little with each bite. The eggs were hot and peppered, and the bread had been warmed near the stove again. She fed Tessa what she could from the rest of the milk, then walked outside with the empty plate tucked under her arm. Quinton was stacking the cupboards beneath the eaves. She waited until he paused before speaking. "I can help. I'm not looking to be a burden." He looked at her, then at the baby on her hip. "You sure you're steady enough?" "I know how to chop kindling. I know how to mend, too." He nodded toward the stump beside the shed. "There's a hatchet there. Just watch the edge, it's sharp." She settled Tessa in a basket of laundry with folded blankets for padding. The baby's eyes drifted shut again, and Naomi crossed to the stump. The hatchet fit her hand like it had waited for her. She set to work, pace slow but even, stacking the splits neatly as she went. "I didn't take her for no reason," she said after a while, not looking up. "I figured." He set another board on the sawhorse. "I wasn't sure if I'd say anything," she added. "But I thought maybe you'd think I was some kind of thief. I've seen thieves. They don't cry themselves hoarse over a child."
She stopped chopping.
"You ever have a family?" "Had a brother. Lost him in Missouri." Never married.
She looked at him then.
You live out here alone? He kept his eyes on his work.
Ido.
Naomi wiped her hands on her skirt and moved to gather the wood she'd stacked. I'm not staying past what's decent. I didn't give you a clock. They worked in silence after that, the kind that felt like something solid being built between them. By midday, clouds had begun to gather in the east. Quinton glanced up at the sky. Storm's coming. You should bring her in. Naomi lifted Tessa and tucked her close. The baby stirred, then settled again. Inside, she found a woven basket beneath the cot and filled it with dry clothes and a few items from her bag. She paused over the small, worn doll she'd brought for Tessa, a hand-stitched thing with button eyes. She hadn't meant to take it, but it had been lying beside the crib. Quinton stepped in carrying a coil of rope and a saddle blanket. He set them near the door, then leaned his rifle against the wall. Cattle get jumpy when it thunders, he said. Naomi nodded. You want me to keep the fire going? That'd be good. She knelt by the hearth and added wood. The flames caught, warm and steady. She felt the baby's weight shift against her chest and looked down to find Tessa watching her with wide, unfocused eyes. She's not mine by blood, Naomi said quietly, but I couldn't leave her. I didn't think you did. She turned her head and found him watching her, not in judgment, but with something gentler. Like he was still deciding, but the scale had already tipped. I don't scare easy, she said. I can tell. The first drops of rain hit the roof with a sound like whispered footsteps. The wind curled around the eaves, and Naomi felt something inside her begin to settle. Not fully, not yet, but enough. Quinton crossed to the table, poured 2 cups of coffee, and handed her one. Naomi sipped slowly, her hands warming around the tin. You got a plan for tomorrow? Same as most days.
Keep the land sound.
Make sure the stock don't wander. She nodded. I can help with that. He looked at her, then at the baby in her arms. We'll see. She held his gaze. We will. The rain passed by morning, leaving the grass wet and the air thick with earth and pine. Naomi stood by the creek with her skirts lifted above her ankles, scrubbing the baby's blanket over a flat stone. The water numbed her fingers, but she kept at it, pressing the wool between her palms until the soap faded and the cloth felt clean. Behind her, the cabin door creaked open. You don't have to do that out here, Quinton said. She didn't turn. The wash basin's for small things. This needed more room. He came closer, stepping around a patch of soaked ground. You always set to work like that? Quiet and early without being asked. I'm not one for waiting around. She wrung the blanket and laid it over a branch to dry, then wiped her hands on her apron. You got a place for sewing? I saw a tear in your shirt sleeve last night. He looked down at his arm as if noticing for the first time. There's a basket beside the hearth. Take anything from it you need. She nodded and picked up the rest of the damp laundry. Tessa lay in a wooden crate nearby, swaddled and half asleep, one hand twitching in a dream. Naomi brushed a curl from the baby's cheek before lifting the basket. You don't speak much about yourself, Quinton said. I didn't think you expected me to. I don't, but I'm curious. She adjusted the weight of the basket against her hip. My mother kept a garden. Not much else. Didn't have time for anything soft. My father was gone before I was old enough to ask why. He didn't push further. Just walked beside her toward the cabin, his silence measured, not awkward. Inside, Naomi laid the laundry by the stove. The warmth would help it dry. Tessa stirred, then started to fuss, so Naomi reached for the bottle she'd boiled earlier, letting the child suck until her noises quieted. Quinton sat near the window, whittling a piece of pine. Wood chips curled onto the floor. What's that for? Naomi asked. Handles for the barn door. The old one split after last winter. You fix everything yourself? No one else to do it. She settled onto the stool opposite him and picked up his shirt from the basket. The rip along the seam hadn't frayed too far, an easy mend with even stitches. She threaded the needle and began. "You ever thought of leaving this place?" she asked. He didn't look up from his carving. "Where would I go?" "There are towns. Bigger ones. Places with people who talk loud and fast and don't notice if you're alone. I like being noticed, just not by the wrong sort." She tied off the thread and reached for another tear. "I used to think I wanted noise. Streets with more than one store. But now, I don't know. Quiet's heavier, but it doesn't bite." He set down the wood and met her gaze. "You looking to stay a while?" "I don't know yet. You wouldn't be unwelcome." Tessa let out a small sneeze, startling herself. Naomi lifted her and tucked her into the crook of her arm. The child's eyes blinked slowly, her breath evening out again. Naomi looked back at Quinton. "You ever think about what it'd be like, not having to do everything alone?"
Ido.
She waited, but he didn't say more. She didn't press. That evening, she baked cornbread in the Dutch oven while Quinton brought in an armload of branches from the far tree line. They ate at the table with the window cracked open, the air smelling of wet leaves and smoke. Tessa slept in the crate beside the stove, wrapped snug in her dried blanket. "You said you had a brother," Naomi said. He nodded slowly. "Ezra. Older by 2 years. He stayed in Carthage when I came west. Kept thinking he'd follow, but he never did." She reached for another slice. "You hear from him still?"
No.
"Not since '74. He was working a freight line down in Arkansas. Got caught in something ugly. Wrote me once from a jail in Little Rock, then nothing." Naomi didn't speak for a moment. "I'm sorry." "Not your doing." She studied his face, the way the lines around his eyes deepened when he looked off toward the barn. She wondered how long it had been since someone asked about his people. After the dishes were done, she stepped out onto the porch. The air was cooler now, the sky brushed with violet. Quinton followed, a mug of coffee in his hand. "You ever sit still?" he asked. "I'm still now." He leaned against the post. "You don't have to go back. If you're worried about someone looking, I'd know if a stranger came near. And I've got a name in town. Sheriff won't cross me without cause." She kept her eyes on the trees. "That man. He thinks he's owed things. He'll lie to get them. Then he'll lie to the wrong person." Naomi glanced at him. "You think you'd scare him off?" "I think I'd rather not have to. But if he came here, he wouldn't like what he found." She believed him. Inside, the fire burned low. Tessa stirred once, but didn't wake. Naomi stood with her hand on the doorframe, watching the baby sleep. "You've done all right by her," Quinton said. "I'm trying." He stepped closer. "I can see that." Naomi turned toward him. The quiet between them settled again, but this time it felt different, not just silence, but understanding. "If I stayed," she said slowly, "I want to earn my place. Not just wait for one. You already are." He said it plainly, like it didn't require more than that. Naomi looked down, then up again. "All right." And she meant it. Naomi rose before the sun reached the ridge. The air held the scent of wood ash and wet grass, and in the dimness, the world felt folded and close. Tessa lay warm in the crook of her arm, her tiny breath steady. Naomi eased from the cot, pressing a kiss to the baby's hair before wrapping her in the shawl and settling her in the cradle Quinton had carved from scrap boards 2 evenings ago. She pulled on her boots, laced tight with rawhide, and stepped outside into the hush of morning. The ground was damp underfoot, the sky streaked pale copper. Chickens stirred in their pen, and the barn door stood open where Quinton had gone out before her. She found him behind the shed, kneeling beside a cracked fence post with a hammer in hand. His shirt clung damp across his back, and his hat brim cast a long shadow over the ground. "There's a hole in the roof of the chicken coop," she said. He straightened, brushing sawdust from his knees. "I know. A raccoon got in last spring. Took 2 hens and left feathers all through the straw. We could patch it with the tin off that broken water trough, she said. If there's enough left. He looked at her, then toward the pile of rusted scrap near the fence line. Might be just enough. You handy with a hammer? I can hold a nail straight. He handed her the hammer and nodded toward the coop. They worked in quiet rhythm, passing tools without needing to ask. She steadied the ladder while he climbed, and when she climbed up herself, he held it with both hands and watched the slope of the roof instead of her ankles. By the time they finished, the sun had burned off the mist and left the yard warm. Naomi wiped her palms on her skirt and leaned against the coop wall. You ever think about building on? She asked. He looked up from where he'd gathered the hammer and nails. You mean the cabin? It's tight with a crib in the corner. And the stove's not enough once the frost sets in. He studied her face, then glanced toward the cabin. I thought on it last winter. Figured it wasn't worth the work for just me. She picked at a splinter in her palm. It wouldn't be just you now. That true? She looked at him full. I wouldn't be standing here if it weren't. Quinton nodded once, then turned toward the barn. Come on. I've got something to show you. Inside the barn, in the back stall where the air smelled of hay and old leather, he pulled aside a canvas draped over a narrow wagon. The wood had been sanded smooth, sides reinforced with iron brackets. I built it for hauling feed in winter, he said. But it's sound enough for travel. Naomi stepped closer, running her fingers along the rail. You're thinking of leaving?
No.
But if someone came asking questions, or if you needed to move fast again, it's better than fleeing on foot. She met his gaze. You'd come with us? I wouldn't let you go alone. She stood still a moment, then said, I don't want to run again, Quinton. Then we'll make sure you don't have to. They stood in the stall, the air thick with dust and promise. Later, while Tessa napped, Naomi sat at the table with a needle in hand, threading stitches into a piece of muslin she'd found in the bottom of the sewing basket. She worked slowly, shaping a bonnet to keep the sun off the baby's face. Quinton carved beside her, shaping a spoon from a block of cedar. You ever been to Fort Laramie? She asked.
Once.
Sold a wagon load of dried meat and hides. Town's bigger now. More soldiers than sense. I have a cousin there. Or I did some years back. We haven't spoken since she married a freighter. You think she'd help you if you rode? I'm not sure I'd want her knowing. He set the spoon down. Then you don't need to. She looked down at the muslin, the thread pulled taut between her fingers. I don't want to be someone else's trouble. Not again. You're not trouble. You're here. That's enough. She looked up at him. You don't say things you don't mean, do you?
No.
And I don't say much, so when I do, it matters. Naomi folded the half-finished bonnet and set it aside. I'm not used to being told I matter. Quinton reached across the table and touched her wrist, gentle and sure. You do. She didn't pull away. Instead, she turned her hand to meet his and let her fingers rest there, between the calluses and warmth and quiet steadiness of his palm. Neither of them spoke again until Tessa woke, hungry and pink-cheeked. Quinton stood and stoked the fire while Naomi fed the baby, her heart full of something unfamiliar but not unwelcome. Something with weight and warmth and the shape of a beginning. Naomi stood at the edge of the garden plot with a hoe in hand, the morning sun tracing lines across the tops of her shoulders. The soil was dry, but gave way under the edge of the blade with steady pressure. She worked in silence, sleeves rolled to the elbow, her hair pinned back in the way Quinton had once called practical but fine. A few rows down, he knelt beside a seed sack, working bean shoots into the earth with the side of his thumb. Neither of them spoke, but the air between them held a kind of quiet companionship, like the hush before a hymn rather than the stillness of absence. When Naomi rose to stretch her back, she looked toward the cabin, where Tessa sat on a folded quilt in the shade. She kicked her legs at nothing and gnawed the corner of a cloth rabbit Naomi had stitched just yesterday. Her laugh, when it came, was sudden and bright. "She's louder these days," Naomi said. Quinton looked up from the dirt. "She's not afraid anymore." Naomi wiped her hands on her apron. "Neither am I." He stood, brushing soil from his palms. "You sure of that?" "I wouldn't be planting roots if I wasn't."
She paused.
"You've made room for both of us here, without asking anything in return." "I've asked," he said. "Just not in words." She walked toward him, stopping close enough that her skirt hem brushed his boot. "Then ask now." He studied her face, not with hesitation, but with care. "Will you stay, Naomi? Not just through the season. I mean truly stay. Raise her here. Build something that's ours." She didn't look away.
"Yes."
"I will." They didn't kiss, not then. But the way he reached for her hand, curling it into his, felt like a promise made with more weight than words could carry. That afternoon, Naomi scrubbed the cabin floor while Quinton patched the barn rafters with pine planks. She hummed under her breath, something old and Danish her mother used to sing when the wind howled across the plains. Tessa crawled in lazy circles near the hearth, her hands slapping the floorboards, her hair curling damp at the temples. By supper time, the light outside had softened into that golden hour where every surface seemed lit from within. Naomi ladled stew into tin bowls while Quinton sliced the last of the rye bread. They ate by the open window, the baby asleep in her cradle, her breathing shallow and even. After the dishes were done and the fire banked low, Quinton stepped out and returned a few minutes later with something wrapped in oilcloth. He laid it on the table and unrolled it slowly, a slim band of silver, shaped into a ring, the metal worn soft at the edges. "My mother wore it," he said. "She passed it to my brother's girl once, but she never married him. Gave it back before he left Missouri." Naomi touched it lightly. "You kept it all this time?" "Didn't know why. Thought maybe it was just habit. Now I think I waited for the right hands." He held it out. "Will you wear it?" She nodded. "Yes." He slid it onto her finger, no ceremony, no audience. Just the two of them and the lamplight, and the hush of a home that had changed shape around them. They married by the creek 2 days later, under a cottonwood with bark like old leather and leaves that whispered overhead. A traveling preacher from Lander had come through with a mule and a Bible, and he read the words with cracked lips and a voice like gravel. There were no guests but the wind and their vows and the baby fussing against Naomi's breast. That night, after the preacher rode off toward the mountains, Naomi and Quinton sat on the porch with her feet in his lap and the baby asleep in a basket at their feet. "I never thought I'd have a husband," she said. "I never thought I'd want to be one, but you do. I've never wanted anything more." She leaned into his side, her head against his shoulder. "We'll face things, I know. People might still come looking, but I'm not afraid of any of it. Not with you. I'll stand with you. Always." She tilted her face toward his, and this time, there was a kiss unhurried and certain, like something they'd already lived through in full. They built the addition before the first frost, a room just wide enough for a second cot and a shelf for Tessa's toys. Naomi stitched curtains from old feed sacks, and Quinton hung a horseshoe over the door, just because. Winters came hard, but the cabin held strong. Naomi taught Tessa to walk beneath those beams, and Quinton carved her a doll with a crooked smile and cedar-smelling hair. They planted more each spring: beans, squash, corn, and by the third harvest, the rows behind the barn ran straight as a hymn line. In town, folks came to know Naomi not as the woman who'd fled in the night, but as the one who baked sourdough that kept a man fed through calving season and stitched buttons so tight they never pulled loose. They knew Quinton as the man who'd once stood alone and now stood beside someone with a quiet kind of strength. By the time Tessa could say "Papa" and mean it, the cabin no longer felt borrowed or temporary. It was theirs, built slow and true, like everything else between them. And when Naomi stood in the field one autumn evening, watching the sun dip low across the ridge, her hand in Quinton's and Tessa chasing crickets in the grass, she knew she'd done more than survive. She'd made a life,
A home.
a family, and she was loved. Fully.
Deeply.
Without end.